Welcome to the Pocklington History and Politics podcast. And for our pilot episode, History Boys try to talk nonsense. Just a quick reminder, no effing and jeffing, but robust banter is perfectly permitted. And we are joined today by Adam Hall, our resident Irish history expert, and Gareth Hughes, author.
I didn't even get the book out. Why don't I have the book ready to...
Should have had it ready, but that's your chance gone now for this episode. But welcome, gentlemen.
This is what the nation wanted.
It was. You're completely right. Just to give you a little bit of an overview, we're going to have some regular features for the few weeks episodes. We're going to have historical top trumps, which we'll start with today with presidents. We're going to have historical song of the week and a book recommendation each week. And to start us off on our pilot episode, we have got our first Pocklington History and Politics student mastermind. And I'm just going to let them in now.
Oh, great start. Great start. Here he comes.
Hello, Henry. How are we doing?
Very
Henry
well.
K.
Henry K.
Hello.
Oxbridge scholar to be.
Oxbridge scholar.
We are ready. We're recording, by the way, so just be careful with the effing and jeffing. As we've said,
yeah, Henry, none of the usual
famous for it.
horrible
Famous
language.
for it, Henry.
Robust banter is fine though. So if you want to be involved in that, that's absolutely fine. Obviously, you're taking part in the first ever Pocklington History and Politics student mastermind. How do you feel?
Wary.
Wary. That's probably the best way to feel.
Yeah, good word.
I am going to obviously play that famous music. So I'm going to play that now just to heighten the tension somewhat as well. So bear with me 2 seconds. Here we go. Just going to share my screen because we are yet to figure out how to properly use audio.
We are smooth with this.
Professional.
Excellent stuff.
I imagine millions of people enjoy just watching that last 30 seconds.
I imagine they did as well. Just to give you an overview of our version of Mastermind, we're going to have a no time limit, but there'll be 10 specialist subject questions and then 10 general knowledge history questions. And we're going to find out who is our Pocklington sixth form history and politics mastermind champion. Our first contestant is name?
Henry K.
Occupation?
Student.
Of course. And your chosen subject?
Fidel Castro.
So 10 questions on Fidel Castro. Our quizmaster today is Mr. Hall. Very lucky to have such an illustrious quizmaster. So to start, 10 questions on Fidel Castro.
Question 1. In 1959, Castro led the overthrow of which military dictator in Cuba to set up the first communist state in the Western Hemisphere?
Fulgencio Batista.
Correct. Ask the name the Cuban leader during a pub quiz in the UK sitcom The Office. David Brent mixes up Fidel Castro for what brand of tinned pies, which is also a city in southwestern Uruguay?
I remind you.
Correct. Question 3. In 1985, Castro gave up what symbol associated with him to support a nationwide health campaign?
The cigar.
Correct. Question 4. Which famous Colombian author had a close relationship with Castro and asked him to read and critique his manuscripts?
Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Correct. 4 for 4. Question 5. One of Castro's most quoted remarks is, "A revolution is not a bed of roses. A revolution is a struggle between the future and the what?"
The past.
Past is correct. Question 6. An attack by a group of 135 revolutionaries led by Fidel Castro in 1953 is widely accepted as the beginning of the Cuban Revolution. Where did this attack take place?
The Moncada barracks.
Correct. Question 7. The infamous Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 was finally diffused by the secret agreement and withdrawal of US nuclear-capable missiles from which country?
Turkey.
Correct. Question 8. Castro presented himself as an exporter of revolution and a champion of the oppressed in the developing world. In 1975, he sent help to left-wing guerrillas, or guerrillas, in which African country in opposition to US-backed South African forces and Zimbabwe's notorious UNITA?
Angola.
Correct. Question 9. According to Escalante, head of the Cuban Secret Service at the height of attempts by CIA and Cuban exiles to assassinate Castro, there were 634 attempts on Castro's life. On that very day in 1963 that JFK was assassinated, an agent had been dispatched to kill Castro using what?
Poison cigar.
Incorrect. The answer is a pen syringe. Question 10. Castro became interested in left-wing anti-imperialism and revolutionary politics while studying law at which university in the 1940s?
The University of Havana.
Correct.
Excellent. That gives you a score in your specialist round. Phenomenal score, actually.
That's fantastic, Henry.
That is some excellent knowledge there. Why Castro?
He's just someone I find really interesting. I like Cuba because it brings together my love of Spanish, and also Castro is really important in history, and it's recent. And the fact that something like that's still going on, that's what really interests me. And the fact that it's so recent, I can talk to my dad about all the events and how he remembers seeing them happen.
Definitely, I found it.
Yeah,
really...
I think.
Sorry, sir.
One of the things. One of the things to me, the best place I've ever been in my life was Cuba while Castro was still president. And my dad, it's amazing, really great knowledge, superb stuff. Well done.
Yeah, I love researching it as well, particularly his kind of exporting of revolution to places like Angola and how that then spread to other African nations, Namibia and places like that. This is fascinating, really, really interesting, controversial character. Rightio.
To the general knowledge questions then. You ready?
Yeah.
Question 1. William the Conqueror, King of England from 1066, was Duke of where from 1035 onwards?
Normandy.
Correct. Question 2. Iwo Jima was a battle in which conflict?
World War II.
Correct. Question 3. Heinrich Schliemann, German businessman and pioneering amateur archaeologist, discovered which famous Bronze Age city in the late 19th century?
Byzantium.
Incorrect. The answer is Troy. Question 4. Which US president is the only president in American history to serve non-consecutive terms?
Grover Cleveland.
Correct. Question 5. Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France before the French Revolution, was from which country originally?
Switzerland.
Incorrect. She was a member of the Austrian royal family.
She was the Austrian bitch.
She was the Austrian bitch, famously.
No, Jeffing. We said no effing and Jeffing.
That's an established title. It's like William the Bastard. These are established historical terms.
Well, there's a feature in itself. Anyway.
Question 6. During the First World War, the British Navy used an innovative form of camouflage with the aim of deceiving German U-boats. What was this patterning known as?
Wave patterning.
Incorrect. It was the dazzle patterning. Question 7. From 1944 and 1945, Nazi Germany resorted to one last throw of the dice using the V weapons, the V1 and V2, early versions of ballistic missiles to terrorize Britain and Europe. In English, what did the V stand for?
Missile.
Incorrect. It's commonly known as vengeance weapons in English, but it actually translates as reprisal or retaliation weapons. Question 8. In 1485, what decisive battle took place in Leicestershire?
Oh, what's it called?
Yes, that's the question.
Yeah. Oh, no, I pass.
Pass. It's the Battle of Bosworth Field. Question 9. John Blank was a royal trumpeter at the courts of Henry VII and Henry VIII. What is so special about him?
That he wasn't beheaded.
A fair
That's a great
answer.
answer. Right answer.
No, he was the only black Tudor that we have an identifiable image for. And question 10. Who was the first woman in Britain to take her seat as an MP following a by-election in 1919?
Emmeline Pankhurst.
Incorrect. The answer is Nancy Astor.
Tough round there, Henry. Bit of a tougher round there.
Yeah, it was.
Very strong start again, but started to kind of fade off at the end there. So you had one pass there, and obviously Mr. Hall gave you the answer to that one. That gives you, so you got 3 for that round. So in total, you're on 12 points. So that's 12 points, which puts you top of the leaderboard currently.
Well done.
One pass.
And also bottom of the leaderboard, if that
Yes.
makes any difference.
Bottom of the
Also equal on the leaderboard.
Yeah, no, slap bang in the middle.
So in a sense, you are historic here because you are in all of those positions simultaneously. So well done, Henry. Thank you for joining us for Student Mastermind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're also, Henry, you're also our youngest competitor ever.
And also our oldest competitor.
And also our medium level competitor.
Yeah.
And our first male competitor.
Yeah. Also our last male competitor. Also our first competitor. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just go on for that. Right, yeah, Henry, thank you for joining us. And obviously we'll have to see where you fit on the leaderboard after we've gone through everyone. So see you later.
Yeah. See you later. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Very
Just
good.
got a horrible image there of poor Henry having to sit while we thought of increasingly ridiculous leaderboard criteria.
I could have gone on for several years.
100%. 100%.
Undo P.
Very, very strong first round there by Henry. I thought 9 out of 10 was phenomenally good for Fidel Castro because those questions weren't easy.
It was like he wrote the questions.
I must say, I've read at least half a biography on Fidel Castro, and I knew 6 of the answers.
You have read at least half a biography on quite a few people, haven't you?
Yeah.
Well, I get it confused because Wikipedia pages are not biographies, are they?
Oh, they can be, in my mind, yeah.
Excellent.
And the basis of books.
How dare you? How very dare you?
That is libelous.
How dare you? Says the person.
Remember, I've read your books and the corresponding Wikipedia pages.
I don't think that my books have.
I've got the early draft of your first one. There's still the hyperlinks.
Oh, true. That is, yeah, just Wikipedia.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't talk about that too much. Otherwise, we might get
I actually might get sued.
legal ramifications from the company. But, luckily, this will have about 5 listeners.
All of the last 1 minute. What a joke.
Yeah, it was.
That's it. Move on.
Moving on. So I mentioned that our feature for the next few weeks is going to be a version of historical top trumps. And this week, we are going to look at presidents, US presidents. And I think we'll keep it quite simple at this stage. And we're going to say at what the best US presidents. Some interesting choices here, I have to say. And we're going to have a chat about what that means, what the best president is and who they are. So we'll start, I think chronologically we'll go. We're going to start with Mr. Hughes's choice.
Well,
and if you'd like to take it away, Mr. Hughes.
Right, I've taken best, not necessarily in the obvious way. Because I wouldn't claim this president to be the very best president. I would claim him to be one of the best presidents that needs further study. So,
interesting.
I'm putting forward to you very quickly, James K. Polk. So Polk was the, I think I'm right. I'm going to get, millions of people are going to watch this and I'm going to comment if I get it wrong. But I think he was the 11th president of the United States of America, 1845 to 1849, Democrat. What's interesting about him for me is he's one of the very, very few. I struggle to find a president similar that does this. He stands for election, says what he wants to achieve, says he'll just do one term only, achieves the things, and stands down. And I think that's a really interesting concept of a leader and as a presidency. Keeping it really simple, he has 4 aims. 1, re-establish the independent treasury system. 2, reduce tariffs. 3, acquire all or some of the Oregon territory, which was disputed with Great Britain. And 4, acquire California from Mexico. In his 4 years in his term in office, the first one, he re-establishes an independent treasury system, and I think it's 1846. This is quite a complicated issue, but essentially there's an economic panic in 1837. There had been an independent treasury system. In 1837, there was a banking crisis, and banks refused to change paper money into gold, and it's led to the need for an independent treasury system, and the Whigs. Well, the very quick point is, Polk brought it back. He brought that back in 1846. 2, the Walker Tariff of 1846. He reduced tariffs from 32% to 25%. This increased revenue from trade by about $15 million and sort of set the precedent for reducing tariffs in that era. 3, the Oregon Territory. This was a fine balance between potentially another war with Britain, but ultimately it's a great effort in statesmanship. And there's an agreement of a split of the Oregon Territory up in the northwest on the, what would it be, the 49th parallel. And then 4th, he annexes Texas. And in 1846, goes to war with Mexico. We could debate this, and Mr. Hall will know this well. We could debate this about whether the rationale was, what the rationale was for that war with Mexico. But ultimately, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo gives America California and New Mexico, which includes modern day parts of Nevada, Utah, probably other areas, Colorado, probably, and massively increases the United States. What he does deliver as Polk is that sea to shining sea, East Coast to West Coast, and he leaves an America which is ready to become an international power. However, why I think he's worth studying is he also leaves an America that is far more sectionally divided, because after the 1820 Compromise, when the 3630 parallel is drawn, north of that, free states, south of that, slave states, by capturing that land from Mexico, you increase the potential land for state slaves. Thus, Polk is worthy of much study in terms of America's international status, the Civil War, and what is a good way to approach the presidency. I just find him an increasingly fascinating president. Forgotten, as I say, but often included in the top 15 to 20 presidents by most historical scholars. So there you go. There's my case for James K. Polk.
I think it's a very interesting way of looking at a president and the success of a president, looking at their achievements. Did they achieve what they set out to do? And in simple terms, he does set out what he achieves to do. I think that legacy is important, though. Maybe there is a missed opportunity there to try and start healing that sectional divide earlier on. And I know in the campaign, he did set out that by taking the Oregon Territory or sorting out the Oregon Territory, that was a counterbalance to potentially making Texas and that land taking off of Mexico a slave state. But clearly he didn't follow that through. And maybe that was a missed opportunity because he went against, for example, the Wilmot Proviso for political reasons quite clearly. So I wonder if that legacy is more toxic than those achievements. Even though he does, you're right, adds 1 million square miles to America, is the embodiment of manifest destiny, which is going to become increasingly prominent in that period from him all the way up to Reconstruction. I don't know.
Yeah, again, to keep it short, I don't think the legacy should be seen with toxicity or negativity. I absolutely acknowledge that the actions lead towards the Civil War, but I think we were leading towards civil war anyway. And I think the legacy of the United States of America being Atlantic to Pacific, north to south, he leaves a much stronger geographically America, but does nothing really to solve and probably does exacerbate problems of sectional tension. However, those problems weren't his. He didn't cause them. They'd been there. Well, we could argue the date they've been there from. However, absolutely right that there are more questions that are unanswered after his presidency, in my opinion.
Is there any debate at the time over America being becoming increasingly an imperial power there? Because that can be seen, of course, of seizing land off of Mexico. I think they managed to occupy Mexico City. I mean, they go into a sovereign state. They go further than maybe they should. I don't know. Did that cause any consternation for people in America at the time?
What's interesting with that, less so, and I think you're going to talk about TR. TR tends to get his negatives. For me, I don't know, you're obviously going to speak about TR in a moment, but he gets to get this brush about, imperialism. Polk doesn't get it, and perhaps he should a little bit. However, one of the interesting legacies of Polk's war in Mexico is that even those nationalistic-minded Democrats find negatives in the Mexico war, because there's this idea that America shouldn't have within their bounds. America should be a white Protestant nation. It shouldn't have Mexicans. It shouldn't have Hispanics within it. And so there's almost an ultra-conservative negative reaction to Polk's invasion of Mexico because it brings in the melting pot idea. It's a really, really fascinating sort of era to look at. And again, for the millions of people watching around the world, I'm no Polk expert, but I think is an area that people should look into more.
Mr. Hall, any thoughts on Polk? I know that you've come across him before while studying foreign policy, also an expert on US foreign policy as well as Irish history.
Genuinely, I would actually agree with Mr. Hughes in terms of someone that deserves a lot more study. I, as I'll talk about when I talk about my chosen president, I looked at this from a slightly different route. And Polk is one who absolutely, it's not a name that an awful lot of people would know. And yet what he did came at a really instrumental part of American history. And ultimately, it is what, I mean, I'm using a very trite phrase, but it is ultimately what puts the USA on the map as we would recognize it in the modern day.
Yeah.
That sealing off of those borders to the north and the south is a really fundamental element of making the USA what it is and what it later becomes. And so that I think that is a really, really key element. And just in response to one thing you were saying about sort of the reputation of America as well, I think that sort of imperialist worry, I think that comes more when America starts going beyond its borders in the sense of going abroad. It's when they start hitting into the Caribbean and the Far East. It's when they start taking the offshore territories that America starts to get the real allegations of imperialism. Yes, obviously Mexico does cause some problems with that, but I think Mexico, they do couch it in other terms, in sort of the danger of what's just across our border. You can justify that kind of action. Okay, I use that term justify loosely, but you can justify it on sort of we're just protecting our own border element. America's imperialist sort of phase, I think, comes when they start going abroad, and that's when they start getting the unambiguous, undebatable argument of this is actually now an imperialist. Relabel it what you like. You are being imperialist when you're taking over foreign nations.
I think you absolutely bang on with that in terms of what to bear in mind with Polk, the situation of Texas, recognizing what has become an independent republic, a breakaway republic from Mexico. So you annex Texas, but then obviously that border issue of Mexico, and it becomes when does not part of your nation become part of your nation? At what point does a military adventure become imperialism? It's a fascinating question.
No, definitely, there's some really interesting stuff there. I mean, as a obviously seamless segue into what Mr. Hall's going to talk about, I think interestingly, his president was one of those when he was a congressman who voted against this war, who spoke about it and said to Polk himself, take me to that bit of land where American soldiers were killed in Mexico. It was quite anti-war here as well. Yeah. So, Mr. Hall.
Oh, and bear in mind, just before we go to stuff, you can argue as well that obviously the invasion of Mexico is very similar to something like the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Definitely. It is not staged, I don't know the phrase to use here, but it's a rationale to go to conflict, which might not actually ultimately historically be true. But
it's like a false flag event, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or it like the old Roman idea of Pax Romana. You only go to war for the peace of Rome. You never. It's all defensive, rather than anything offensive.
But defensive often can be offensive.
It has to be at times. So, Mr. Hall, who is your best president?
So I've gone for quite a traditional option in that Abraham Lincoln was the first name that jumped into my head when I even.
I thought you'd be Donald Trump.
I'm not even going to dignify that.
I thought he was going to leave then. I thought he was literally going to I'm done with this. See you later.
Yeah, the first name that came to mind was Abraham Lincoln. And actually, the reason I then kept that in mind was because I was interested in the fact that when I considered the question, Lincoln just jumped into my head. And I think, and sort of some of the information I've sort of picked up backs this up, Lincoln would be the answer that an awful lot of people would give, regardless of their knowledge of American history or their knowledge of the US presidential system. Lincoln is the name that would be at the tip of your tongue, along with Washington, Kennedy. These are the names that would come forward anyway. And I think even the briefest look backs that up. If you look at where Lincoln falls in US history, obviously the time of the Civil War, the time of the potential split of America, overseeing that sort of retention of the Union, the Gettysburg Address, the 13th Amendment particularly is a massively shaping element of his history, American history. And particularly, just out of interest for this, because I was curious to back up that sort of the layman's, sort of the common opinion. And I looked up the sort of US presidents rankings, and I managed to find 20 different systems, all of which rank the different presidents to different levels. Lincoln comes in the top third to the top three in every single one of 20 surveys spanning, is it 20 years? And in over half of them, he's listed at the top. Now, that alone, if you add to that the wider element, which again would be the area I'd inevitably interested in, which is you look at the cultural impact of Lincoln, you look at the number of times when films are based on him, he as a character turns up. You get the very serious Daniel Day-Lewis sort of, like, I suppose you could argue properly done. And Lincoln is the person they go with. There aren't, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hughes, I don't believe there are any films about Polk.
Not yet, but I'm writing one.
Wikipedia page being adapted into a script, good. You know, Lincoln is the go-to. And even when you look at the more ridiculous elements, and you're going to laugh at me, both of you, but you know my modern interests. Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. Why do you choose Abraham Lincoln?
Absolutely love that film. That is a great film.
Why do you choose Lincoln?
That is a film. Everyone needs to watch that film.
Yeah, and you pick Lincoln because he's the best president. Why is it when Futurama wants a president, they have Nixon, they have Lincoln? Because they go for the well-known, the more famous presidents. The Civilization computer games used Lincoln as the American avatar for an awfully long time, and therefore it is his name that crops up. His monument in the center of Washington, that we all love, that is the central point. That is the key area. And so therefore, my pick is Lincoln. Yes, obviously we can list what he did historically, but actually the cultural impact, the wider impact, the popular impact of Lincoln is why I have him as my best president.
I really like that way of looking at things, I have to say. I think that's it's again a different way of looking at someone, their popular legacy, their cultural legacy as well. Other presidents are looked at though in that way as well. I mean, the one I'm going to talk about quite soon and I will champion is TR, and TR features in Night at the Museum, played by Robin Williams. Fantastic, absolute fantastic portrayal of him in many respects. The same sort of energy that TR had, I think. But no, I think that's a really good way of looking at him, really interesting way of looking at him.
What was interesting about Lincoln, and I've only really appreciated this recently. I completely agree with you, by the way, Mr. Hall. The legacy is massive.
Odd emphasis.
No, I don't want to say Adam.
Oh,
I have done that.
Because apparently we have names.
Yeah,
probably don't know that, but we have real names.
He was on his... in the 2, 3, well, even up to 10 years after his death, was a massively controversial figure. And I read a chapter in a book recently. Those alive in the 1880s would have found it, to 15, 20 years after his death, would have found it odd that he would have been in the top 3 presidents. they would have actually found it quite shocking. It's seen as a very controversial figure for 30, 40 years after his death, somebody who was potentially one of the most divisive presidents of all time. And
I mean, you
again,
can argue his inauguration sparks the Civil War. I mean, that is the very definition of divisive.
yeah, and it's important to keep remembering that when we teach Lincoln, we have to remember that he's a devious politician. He maneuvers all the time. If you look at the Lincoln Douglas speeches, in an era like today, you couldn't do what Lincoln and Douglas did, which is change their message dependent on the audience they've got. Lincoln was a politician, an absolute politician to his core. And I've got a lot of time for him. I do think he's one of the greatest American presidents. I do think that his legacy is heightened by his death.
I was going to say that. The fact he's assassinated, I think, does make a big difference to undoing a lot of that, in the same way that Kennedy did. I don't think the other two assassinated presidents have the same, I don't think it has the same effect. But both Kennedy and Lincoln, I genuinely think, are positively remembered because of the veneration of the dead. I think that's what it comes down to.
I think when you look at Kennedy particularly, there's this whole idea about him in popular culture that he was a change maker, that he was going to bring around more change. I would argue that by the time he died, the kind of changes he was trying to push on society had slowed down, and he wasn't himself really that much of a champion of great change. Yes, he was young. Yes, he was the face for the time, but actually his death helps his legacy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure he wasn't that happy about that.
No, I don't think he was that happy about it either. But
I completely agree. I've gone back and forth on Kennedy a lot over my time studying presidents, and I do think he's an extremely good president. And there's an awful lot of positives that we should argue about Kennedy, but you're absolutely right that things like the civil rights legislation wouldn't have gone through at the same time as it did under Johnson if it wasn't for Kennedy's death. I do think Kennedy's a fantastic president. Look at his actions over Cuban Missile Crisis. That alone should put him in the top 10 or 15. Fantastic.
But there is a test here, though, and it's an area I asked the question without being able to answer it. Does the same reputational boost happen to the other two assassinated presidents?
McKinley, definitely not.
Oh, often really, isn't it?
McKinley,
Lincoln, yeah.
So there is something distinct. You can't just say the assassination is one.
And let's have a little word for Spencer Perceval, UK Prime Minister, assassinated.
Did he get a boost to his reputation?
No.
Okay. So there must be something distinct about Kennedy and Lincoln then.
Yeah, I think it's the time in which they live as well. I think that if you look at when Lincoln's assassinated, it's after the Civil War. It's really literally in the aftermath of the Civil War. It's this period of healing and reconstruction. It probably gives that a boost for a while, definitely. In my take on things, in my reading of it. With Kennedy, it is a time of great change. With McKinley, which does actually nicely segue into my president as well. Some historians have seen him as the very beginnings of progressivism with him, but I kind of disagree with that. I don't really see how his pro-business policies are very progressive, but there wasn't this change in the air as much. I think this was actually forced through more by my president, who I will talk about as well.
Come on, give us your president.
So my president is Theodore Roosevelt, TR, never Teddy, but TR.
Never, don't call him Teddy.
Do not call him Teddy.
Do not call him Teddy.
Interestingly, when we look at these kind of lists of great presidents, he is consistently in the top 4, actually, across these. He, in kind of football parlance, he's always up there with the Champions League place.
Champions League place, yeah.
Champions League place, which is very, very respectable. And of course, it's quite interesting. If you look at that great American monument, Mount Rushmore, he sits kind of tucked in between Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson. And you've obviously got Washington there, front and center, right out the front. And he's a bit of a weird one, you'd think, to put there, but he's clearly considered by many a great American. And my argument for why he's a great president, actually, is because he kind of defines what it means to be a modern president, I would argue. He sets a lot of precedents in terms of his relationship with the media and using the media to change things. So, for example, his relationship with the muckraking media at the time, like McClure's magazine, Upton Sinclair, and how vital that is in trying to change things in the meat industry, trying to clean up the food and drug industry as well to protect everyday Americans. He's the first American president, I would argue as well, who, well, not the first, but he's very important in redefining the bounds of what a president can do. He says that I will do everything in my power that is not explicitly banned by the Constitution to help out my fellow Americans. But he phrases it in a clever way, because he comes up with his square deal, which is a square deal for all Americans, which includes business as well. Now, some people, and he did play up to this, see him as a trust buster, destroying these big businesses at the time, the Standard Oils of the world, the American tobaccos, but he was a trust regulator. He realized big business was here to stay. It was part of American society. But I really think he's a great president because of the way he redefines the presidency, makes it into a more modern presidency, and really sets the precedent for that other great president who I could have chosen as well, FDR. We have FDR's obviously 3 R's. We also have increasingly historians talking about TR's 3 C's. So we've got corporate protection, corporate regulation. We've got consumer protection, and we've got conservation. And this is something where he's very forward thinking. You don't get the Grand Canyon without TR, because he adds lots and lots of funds into the National Park Service and protects America in that way. He's also just an absolute character, one of the most characterful presidents there have been. You know, he's a sheriff in the Badlands of Dakota, goes there after the tragic death of his wife and mother on the same day, on Valentine's Day as well. He is a police commissioner in New York, and again plays up to the media there, goes out in the night to see policemen sleeping with prostitutes, gambling and drinking in illicit dens. He goes out there to do these things. He's just this ball of energy.
You don't think he was just caught there and came up with a really quick excuse?
That would be fantastic. Yeah.
No, I'm checking the police.
I'm checking.
Okay, then, Mr. President.
It's interesting, those stories though. When he got these policemen who were up to no good, maybe accepting bribes for allowing a saloon to stay open, he literally said, the next day I want you in front of me in my office to dress you down, and there'd be his media friends there taking pictures of all these people as well. He was very savvy. Very savvy up to a point, and of course there are limitations with him as well. Like much of the progressive era, his achievements on race are very limited. Better than Woodrow Wilson, obviously, who's the president after him. He invites Booker T. Washington to the White House. He's the first president to invite an African American to eat with him in the White House, but the backlash from that puts him off ever doing that again. But then you've got, for example, what happens in Brownsville, Texas in 1906, where there's a shooting spree, and they simply just blame the African American soldiers. It's just saying it must be them, and he is quite instrumental in their dishonorable discharge. But in the whole context of progressivism, maybe he is a little bit more forward thinking. Yes, social Darwinist. We see that with his views on the Philippines and how he mentions some of the rebels in the Philippines, for example. You've got the Panama Canal, which is notoriously iffy in terms of inciting a rebellion there against another sovereign state. But I
like the use of the word iffy.
Yeah, it's a bit of a euphemism, isn't it? But no, as you can tell, I'm a massive fan of his, partly because of his character, partly because of that massive ball of energy he is.
That's one thing I want to bring up with you, that I think for me, TR is the president that makes character as important as policy. I do. He's a great character as a president. Again, it's not something that somebody who I've studied or taught, but he is a president I find fascinating due to his character. And what I quite like about him as well is he draws ire from both sides. So if you're on the left, if you're sort of liberal or socialist, you see him as interventionist and imperialist. If you're on the right, you see him as you're angry at his welfare state position and his big government position. And I quite like that, actually. He draws criticism from both sides.
He flirted with being a Democrat. I mean, you see it in letters. He's quite happy. He's not an ideological president in that sense. He was very much a president who is quite pragmatic. He goes to the left later in his career with his nationalism campaign with the Progressive Party. But yeah, I think you're completely right. The Republicans were terrified of him, hence why they made him vice president to McKinley. And when McKinley was assassinated, Mark Hanna, who's this great Republican grandee who controls everything in the Republican Party at that time, is kind of absolutely petrified what TR will do. And TR is clever though, because he doesn't go too far in that first term. He needs to win his own term as president, and then he can start pushing things. And I think that's when you start to see him flexing his muscles a little bit more. But I think also something that's really interesting about him as well is he arguably stops there being a socialist revolution in America. There was in 1992.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
Threat there to, and this is what progressivism does. Whatever you think about the progressive movement and progressive presidents, some people say they didn't do enough. Well, they weren't there to do massive overhaul and revolution and massive reform. They're there to stop this. They're there to try and keep America going on, to get rid of the worst elements, but keep America as it is in the broadest term. But if you think about 1902, he is the first president, from my knowledge, to mediate in the anthracite coal strike. The first president to mediate with workers.
Labour relations.
With labour relations. And that is, and he does side with the employees, and they do get better working conditions. They get less hours, they get slightly better pay. There's no trade union recognition because he hasn't gone quite that far.
Yeah.
But he lays the foundations for what is going to happen under FDR and future presidents.
Where's the Wagner Act? Is that under FDR?
That's under FDR, yeah.
Yeah.
But without TR, you don't have FDR.
Yeah.
You can't. He lays a lot of the groundwork, and arguably Taft does, and Wilson as well in some of his economic reforms. Obviously, not anything to do with society or race, where he is regressive even for the time.
It does make you wonder what he could have done with Twitter.
Who?
Like, had a character like TR had access to Twitter,
that would have been very interesting.
That was the era he was operating in. He could have been phenomenal.
Definitely.
I would say if Andrew Jackson had Twitter, you've got, dare I say, an early Trump. But that's a different discussion for another day.
Jens, I really enjoyed that discussion. I think there's
awesome.
I think there's a lot there about different ways in which we can judge a president to be successful, or a best president as well. I think Polk is a definite outsider there, and of course looking at Lincoln in that different way is interesting as well. As I said, TR, I just have a soft spot for him. Fond of him.
TR's boxing, a good fighter. I like.
Well, good fighter until he lost the sight in one of his eyes because he invited his boxer in.
Lincoln was a good fighter. Lincoln was a good sort of amateur wrestler, and he did a lot of, I believe he fought for a bit of money when in his 20s as well.
How many minutes was it until wrestling was mentioned in the podcast?
I think we've done very well.
Like, we have done very well.
Far before wrestling came into it.
I was going to screen share about 10 years ago when Donald Trump actually turned up in WWE, but we'll save that for another show.
Have you heard now that they are talking about removing Trump's face from Home Alone 2 and replacing it with a 40-year-old Macaulay Culkin?
I have not.
Yeah, I saw that. You see, that genuinely, that's the kind of, this is now into a different conversation, but that's the kind of like revisionism that I really don't like. Like, you've got more than enough ways to attack Donald Trump and more than enough issues. Like, I don't think anyone is offended by his cameo in Home Alone 2. No one's sitting there going, this is absolutely outrageous that you got to be at Home Alone. I don't think that's what bothers people.
And also, I think if Andrew Jackson's face is still on, is it the $20 bill? I think they might need to address whether that should be the case.
Trump in Home Alone is not the target at the moment, I don't think. I think there are bigger Trump problems.
No, I think that is. I don't think inauguration matters. I think he's on Home Alone 2. Get it.
Yeah, no,
that's off now.
I tell you what,
children watch that.
I tell you what does induce anger about that is his acting. If anything, he should be removed for that.
Yeah, appalling.
The whole scene, it's absolutely appalling.
A lot of movies just did, because it was one of his standard requests. If anyone wanted to film in his property, that he could have a cameo. And a lot of movie directors and makers just like they filmed it and then just cut the scene. So he got what he wanted, but they never actually bothered putting it home. I think Home Alone 2 was unusual for actually putting the scene in the finished product.
Now, this is what this podcast should be about.
Presidents who have a Hollywood film career.
Trump's cameos.
You see Polk in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
I would love to see that. Doesn't he play Shredder?
He do, actually, I think he plays Super Shredder in Turtles 2. Kevin Nash, wrestler.
Does he? Oh, here we go. We've managed to get to another wrestling thing. Just a very quick one as we got onto this. We've obviously got Polk in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Where do you think Lincoln would be in? Obviously, we've got a film.
A Vampire Slayer. So,
is there anything else he could be in?
Oh,
He'd make a good X-Man.
yeah, he would.
He would, wouldn't he? Like a kind of Charles Xavier kind of thing, like a
Yeah.
master there. TR, well, he's obviously in Night in the Museum, but what else could he be in?
Rocky.
He'd be good in Rocky, wouldn't he? As a fighter, yeah, that would be good.
He'd do the Apollo Creed stuff.
Oh, he would.
He'd be absolutely fully in the American Stars and Stripes, doing all the stuff.
Loving it, absolutely loving it. Right, obviously we've finished our historical top trumps there. There's no winner. It's just an interesting discussion about
History is the winner there.
History is the winner,
And
definitely.
we'll say that every week.
The book recommendation for this week is very topical, I'd say. It's Doris Kearns Goodwin, absolutely fantastic on American presidents in particular. And I'm going with Leadership, Lessons from the Presidents for Turbulent Times, which is a nice summary of Lincoln. You've got TR in there. You've got LBJ as well.
Yeah.
It's just the three of them, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's taken from a number of her other works that she's written, and it tells you about their kind of political upbringing, the challenges they've had to overcome, and the final part is these lessons from leadership. And it's quite interesting when she kind of maps some of the common features among them as well. So Lincoln's real bad depression. I didn't realize that he was so
Black
depressed.
Dog, yeah.
It's very similar to Churchill there. And you've got obviously the aftermath of the death of TR's wife and mother, and then you've got with LBJ as well, his reaction to kind of losing some political status. And I found that bit of the book very interesting, so I'd heartily recommend it if you haven't read it.
I would recommend everything by Doris Kearns Goodwin. I think everything she's written is absolute gold dust. She has written one of the most unique biographies of any president I've ever read. One on LBJ, you've got to read it.
And I would recommend Battlefields Made Easy by Gareth Hughes.
Me too.
Both of them.
Oh, obviously, the whole series.
Yeah, but it's beautiful stuff.
Excellent stuff. Which leaves us with our historical song of the week, and that's over to Mr. Hughes, historical song of the week.
So I need to share screen. Just bear with while the old man remembers how to do this. Share computer sound. There we go. Right. So, gentlemen, I want you to imagine that you are in Vienna, and the year is 1683. Are you there?
Yeah, in Vienna in 1683.
Yep. So the city is under siege, and there are 140,000 soldiers of the Ottoman Empire besieging this city, and tunnels are being dug underneath the moat and the city walls. And it really is a race against time, because would the Holy League, this sort of Christian coalition under the command of the Polish king, John III, make it to save Vienna in time? Would that happen? I mean, what a knife edge we're on here for this. Well, they did. And some of the first troops to make it there were the fearsome warriors, the Winged Hussars. And I would like to play for you now the first 1 minute, that's 60 seconds, of Winged Hussars by the department's favourite band. We have to start with them, Sabaton. Are you ready, gents? Here we go.
When the Winged Hussars arrive,
All right, here we go.
a cry for help in time of need, awaits relief from Holy League. 60 days of siege outnumbered and weak. Sent a message to the sky, wounded soldiers left to die. Will they hold the wall, or will the city fall? Dedication, that outnumbered 15 to 1. And the battle's begun, and the Winged Hussars arrive. Coming down the mountainside. Then the Winged Hussars arrive. Coming down, they turn the tide.
The Winged Hussars arrived, coming down the mountainside, and everything was okay.
It's very similar to a lot of their other works. You know what you're getting with Sabaton.
Hey, I can do 3 years of this if you want with Sabaton.
Yeah, definitely. You did send me something recently, which I was surprised that they were able to do.
I was surprised at that. Maybe for a future week, because I'm not sure.
I'm not sure if we can share that song. It wasn't offensive. It was educational.
It was educational.
I do think it is a little bit, an interesting choice.
It's edgy. It's edgy in a certain way.
It's definitely edgy in a certain way, 100%.
We're going to have to do Gallipoli at some point. I mean, that's amazing.
We're definitely going to have to do Gallipoli. Interesting song, that. Interesting period of history that I didn't know much about.
Well, obviously, I'm an expert in that siege of Vienna in 1683.
So 17th
featured in Mr. Hughes' upcoming book.
Battlefields Made Easy, Vienna, 1683.
Through the eyes of Sabaton.
Through the eyes of Sabaton. It's got a bit of the flavour of Lord of the Rings, you know, when they're coming down the hill, the cavalry to save. Is it Helm's Deep, Mr. Hall?
Yes, it is, yeah.
One of your favourite films, that, isn't it, Mr. Hughes?
Still. And
is that the walking film?
There we go. Mr. Hughes' favourite walking film.
Is that where they just go for a walk for like 7 hours? Is that?
Yes, you utter Philistine. It's where they go for a walk for 7 hours.
And they've lost the ring or something.
Yeah, that one. Where they go for a walk because they've lost a ring. Yeah.
It's like
I think you've missed some of Tolkien's
all right, mate, I've lost my ring. Oh, let's go walk for 7 hours to try and find it.
That's exactly what the film is. That should be the synopsis on IMDb. I think you should try and write that to them to let them know. Thank you, chaps. That was a good pilot episode. We hope you all enjoy.
World class.
And yeah, I think it's world class as well. Seeing as this is the first one we've ever done, I think that we'll probably get a podcast award next week.
What can you download this on? Are we on Apple yet?
So in the future, we hope to be on all of the
every streaming platform available.
Is available, and obviously we'll keep up with the same sound quality, the kind of sharing of screens, because
it makes
it really smooth.
Even when it's on iPlayer and Netflix, it gives it that authentic feel.
Hang on, how much? What's the cut each, by the way?
Oh, I've obviously done all the work as ever, so I'll be taking 95% of that.
Unlucky, I actually am head of department, so.
Okay, so me and you will share it 50-50, and then Adam will get nothing.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, you happy with that, Adam?
I mean, no, but does it matter?
Not really, no. Right, guys, I'll save.
That was great.
I'm going to stop recording.
All right. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.